Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Laura and I talk about people liking people more than animals. We interview Julia Gohlke about environmental and human health, shaping risk, and policy. And finally, hippos can't actually swim. They have very big bones, so big and dense, in fact, that they are barely buoyant at all. They don't swim and instead perform a slow motion gallop in the riverbed. That's right. When they call them river horses, that's what they mean. They even sleep underwater, and they have a build that basically lets them bob up to take a breath and sink back down without waking, which is both cool and terrifying to think about. Yeah, they don't actually have fat. They're just all muscle. They are tanks.
Really?
So, yeah, they seem like they have fat, but they don't. And that's why they can run like 30 miles an hour, which is
Oh, wow,
crazy.
that's crazy.
It doesn't make any sense. But you can't outrun a hippo, so don't mess with them. That's
don't try.
That's the number one rule. Yeah.
No, when I was in Africa, we got to see them running at night, and they are huge and scary and fast.
Yeah. No, thank you. No, thank you. That's wild. Hit that music. NAEP just completed another round of essential and advanced NEPA workshops. Our next event is scheduled in person for November 13th and 14th in Denver, Colorado. These training workshops are designed for emerging and experienced environmental professionals engaged in the preparation of environmental assessments and environmental impact statements to fulfill the federal lead agency responsibilities pursuant to the National Environmental Policy Act. These courses are designed to help you understand the requirements and how to fulfill the spirit and legislative intent of NEPA. That's absolutely essential in a time like this where agency policies are being updated rapidly. Please check that out at www.naep.org. Let's get to our segment. I had one about like people like people more than animals.
Yeah, what's that all about?
I mean, we've seen this. Like, I think one of my all-time favorite public meetings that we ever did was for a project to take a transmission line from Canada to New York City. And one town decided that they wanted to they insisted that we have a public meeting with them because the transmission line was coming out of the water and into their town and then back in the water. And so it was avoiding sturgeon spawning habitat.
Right.
And it was basically, they came up with a plan to just, eviscerate the project, but so much of it was, they didn't understand what was happening. Everybody thought this transmission line was like a transmission, like a above ground pipe, like you'd see like a pipeline for oil. And we're like, no, it's 6 inches in diameter and it goes, 12 feet underground, 20 feet, 12 to 20 feet underground. They were worried about cemeteries. Like they were going to plow through their graves. And I'm like, well, if you're digging them that deep, that's on you really. But truly the main thing was that they were literally like, why would you put this through here to save a fish?
Yeah.
They're like, we're people. We are more important than a fish. And that was said many different times in many different ways at that meeting. And it was something interesting with the interview today where hearing our interviewee talk about that, where it's like, people are genuinely more interested in people than animals. And as sad as it is, I mean, it's true. It makes sense. But I don't know. Like, it's like one of those things where that makes my heart a little sad. I don't know how you feel about it, Laura, but it's like, she's right, but I'm sad about it. I don't know.
I mean, it is sad. I think that the better thing is to recognize that we are all God's creatures or universe's creatures or Mother Earth's creatures, and that we should not be singling out one more important than the other. But at the same time, it's natural instinct to protect your own.
Of course.
And so I think so much of what we do is actually very primal. And so, yes, we're having a sophisticated public meeting, but we're just pumping out primal thoughts and instincts. And one of them is to preserve our own.
Yeah. And that's a very good thought too, because I think environmental professionals sometimes spend a lot of time out in the wilderness. I mean, heck, I've had interviews where people are like, I don't like people. And I'm like, well, that's not great for the team you'll be working with. I mean, it's like a good thing because I love that we're talking about industries in all aspects, not just the ones that, you say environmental professional, everyone thinks you're in the woods, wrestling bears or whatever. So
Or
it's really
not.
neat to get different perspective on that. And it was really fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I mean, as a vegetarian for a long time, there's a lot of times when people are like, oh, I'm such an animal lover. And I'm like, okay, cool. How's that steak?
Yeah. Yeah, there's always limits. There really are. Sometimes
So,
food's too good or whatever. And yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't take it personally, but it's like, it's also when people say that people are first or we're more important,
Yeah.
there is also this like disengagement or detachment that we have for other living things.
Yeah. That's a good point. And in a way, that's also self-preservation, right? You don't want to think about it every single time you're having a steak, or you can't eat the steak, you know?
Yeah, which is why I can't eat it.
Yeah. Was it like Jim Gaffigan, I think, had a great joke about it where he's just like, you just pretend that the chicken was a real SOB, you know?
Yeah. It
Like,
deserves to be eaten.
yeah, it deserves to be eaten. It's like, yeah, good thing this chicken stole my wallet. You know, it's a cute bit. Yeah.
Funny
Um,
dude.
but yeah. I don't know. I think we're rambling, but yeah, I think that's good enough. Why don't we get to our interview?
Sounds good.
Hello and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Julia Gohlke with us. Julia is a professor of environmental health in the Department of Population Health Sciences at Virginia Tech. Go Hokies! Julia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, yeah, we're happy to have you. And what's it like teaching environmental health right now? What's that all about? What topics are you covering?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. When I started my career, it was much more around chemical risk assessment. So, how chemicals affect the human body and how we use different systems to test and make sure that the chemicals we put out into the environment are safe, depending on different exposure scenarios. And I would say that the field has kind of grown to include a lot more than just chemical risk assessment. So, these days, when we teach environmental health, our intro environmental health class, we talk about climate change and how that impacts human health, different social issues, so built environment and how that impacts our health. So we've made a progression for sure.
So, I mean, that sounds like it starts to cover lots of different areas. Like, so how do you get your students to focus on, do they focus on any one thing? Are they learning a whole bunch of different things and then focusing later? What's your approach to teaching?
In an intro environmental health class, so at Virginia Tech, we have basically two tracks for our master's in public health program. And one is more around health behavior, another is around infectious disease. And so they have to take environmental health, and really we want to kind of give them opportunities. If they're more focused on infectious disease, we look at exposures, environmental exposures that can impact infectious disease. If they're more focused on health behavior, we might look at things that like the food environment that affects different health behaviors. So we try and meet students where they're at and what their interests are. Environmental health is such a huge field that we can typically find something that will really pique their interest.
For sure. But I love it because, like, a part of me, like, I actually have a little bit of background in like what they called conservation medicine, right? That's what I did my grad work in, working with wildlife disease and how that affects human health. And so I see you started your career in toxicology, which is pretty cool. But how did you get from toxicology to where you are now?
Yeah, so definitely when I was first starting out and in my PhD, actually in my undergrad, I was doing a lot more around fisheries, and I was interested actually in wildlife health. And I was working with this professor in my undergrad in which he noticed a hybridization event in a stream in California of two minnow species. And his hypothesis was that it was a chemical contaminant that actually caused this kind of endocrine disruption and caused this hybridization of fish. And that was like my first exposure in undergrad. Is like, wait, chemicals can do that?
Yeah.
So then that got me really interested in like, well, wait a second, if they're doing that to fish, if that's, the hypothesis of how this happens in fish, what are those chemicals doing to humans?
Right.
So that's what really got me interested then in environmental health and going for, first a master's and a PhD and looking at how chemicals affect brain development. I was really interested in how different chemicals that we have in our environment affect brain development, and then how we use animal models to evaluate safe levels of exposure of those chemicals. because the brain development in animal models is quite different than in humans and primates. Right. And so I was really interested in how we kind of make that translation. So studied a lot of different, chemicals in that regard and how risk assessment models are used to kind of make that jump.
And of course, now all I can think about is all the chemicals and how they affected my brain growing up. And
Yes.
like, I don't know, like what's the most shocking thing you found about like what you've seen, like how the chemicals impact humans, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think the lead story is an interesting one. We've known lead is really a neurodevelopmental toxicant, so it really affects the developing brain, but it's been around forever, I mean, it's really, it kind of comes up most recently in lead pipes and through drinking water. I remember, again, when I first even just really learned that it was an issue, I remember calling my dad up. So my family hunts a lot, and we used to do the little lead pellets into the shotgun cases. We would like do that with my dad, put it on. Right. And we would, and when we're fishing too, like the little weights, like we would clamp them with our teeth,
Of course.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, and I remember first learning about it, and I called my dad. I was like, that was like probably really dangerous. Like, why were we doing that? And he was like, oh, it's fine. It's just a little bit of exposure. And so there's also this like risk perception thing that I think, has definitely changed throughout time. That is really, really interesting. What kind of exposures we should really be concerned about versus not. So I think that was probably one of the most kind of, as I've grown in the field, one of the most interesting things that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I mean, don't worry, I'm still not going to sleep tonight. I'm still going to be wondering what else is affecting. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, but it's really interesting. I think it's a really good point you bring up, is that a lot of times we hear things are bad and we're like, oh, okay, well, I'll never touch lead again, or I'll never be near lead again. I'll make sure that we eradicate lead from the planet. And that's not necessarily the right or smart thing to do all the time. So how do you manage those expectations when people do come to you and are like, we have to get rid of everything, right? Like, I know PFAS is a big thing that people keep talking about now. And, we can't even measure to the part, because it's so small, it's hard to get rid of at all. So how do you handle that kind of fear?
Yeah, I agree. That is a really challenging part of environmental health. So when I think about it in terms of, EPA sets these standards, or they think about like a risk in 1 in a million. And a lot of people, like, again, that's like a very weird kind of concept. And I don't even really know what that means. You have a risk of 1 in a million of getting cancer if you are exposed to this level. If you have it in your drinking water for your lifetime, it's a lifetime cancer risk, this kind of thing. And it's very difficult then to kind of translate that to just everyday settings. And people want to compare it to other risks too. Right. It's like, okay, well, what's in the whole scheme of things, is that like the same as my risk for getting in a car and, having a car accident? Well, no, it's not. But those aren't really actually good comparisons either, right? Because one is exposure that you don't really, know or have agreed to take on. Whereas one is that exposure is like, cars are risky, but gosh, they make my life a lot simpler, and I'm going to use it, and I know there's risk. And so thinking about like the role of our government and kind of minimizing these chemical risks that we view as like shouldn't necessarily be there, or what's not our personal responsibility, versus other risks in our daily lives. Like it's a very hard kind of thing to grasp. And it really, at the end of the day, it's a societal decision, right? Do we want our government to regulate chemicals down to the 1 in a million risk? Or are we like, hey, maybe not? Like, I'm fine with 1 in 10,000, So that's like a societal decision that, we just have to figure out.
Gosh, it's so funny though. I love like the idea of risk is always like, to me, it's always it's kind of like influenced a ton by control, right? Planes are far less risky than cars. I feel much more uncomfortable in a plane because I can't fix it if something goes wrong, right? I have no control over that. And I think there's a lot of that too when it comes to these kinds of things. It's like, oh, I can't even begin to understand how to control for chemicals. And it just seems kind of like such a hard concept for people to grasp. Is that kind of what you see as well?
Yeah. And also, the perception too, again, that uncontrollable versus controllable is so important when you perceive and decide to take on risk. And different people have different levels, so there have been tons of studies around that are really interesting. Look at differences based on gender, based on socioeconomic class, all these things that are,
Well, it's
man,
that's
like,
true too. I have friends who will only drink bottled water, and I'm like grateful that we can drink out of our tap after like traveling to other countries where you can't. So like their level of risk that they're willing to take on drinking their water is different than mine. But then I also know about plastics and everything else, and I'm like, I can't weigh this risk either. So I'm just going with the tap water because it's cheaper.
Yeah. And how you weigh different risks too, so like an ecological risk from plastic pollution versus a human health risk. And the bottled water thing is really interesting.
Do you guys talk about that in the classroom? Like what are the students learning around this stuff?
Absolutely. And thinking about kind of, ranking risks and what, our kind of personal preferences of like, I care more about plastic pollution impacting dolphins. I don't care as much about that. I care about, my future, endocrine levels and, even the possibility of messing with my endocrine system is scarier and generates more fear in me. So I'm going to, do everything I can to prevent that, and it's different for different people. One of the really interesting things that came up in a journal club very recently is around fluoride risk. And that's been in the media.
Yeah. Oh, man, I was about to ask you about that. Yeah.
And when I was kind of going through grad school and stuff, things that affected brain development in early, like, in utero or early childhood, like blood, again, the classic, and then has impacts all through life. Like that was like kind of, if you kind of rank health risks, that was really high. It's kind of like, we don't want any chemicals that do that. Like that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Dental cavities, oh well, everyone has them. I've got fillings. Like, it's like, we would like to prevent them, but like, do we really care about that much? Probably not. But it was so interesting because it was literally like, it felt like it was flipped. We asked students, what do you think is more kind of important, just like to you personally? And they're like, well, I think, I remember one student saying, I think even if there is a little bit of brain development, impact, if you're in a good school and a nurturing environment, can't those like behavioral, can't that be, just reversed? And most people don't have dental insurance. And so having like, losing all your teeth and things like that's like really, I would rate that as really important. And so it was like this really interesting, I like walked out of that journal club like, wow, like, this whole like health risk perception thing is like so different.
Yeah, well, it's got to be like, I got to keep it very interesting for you because it's like,
definitely.
You're talking even about like, climate change and how that's become much more prevalent as well. I mean, I don't know if that changes your conversations in class as well. I assume it does to some degree. So like, are we transitioning away from talking about toxicology risk to climate risk, or is it just kind of in addition to?
I would say it's in addition to right now, but I would say that there are some people that feel like, there's only so much space. And so once you start talking about climate change a lot, it's kind of crowding out the kind of the chemical risk assessment part. I would say that, not that I've done like a scientific study on this, but just thinking about, colleagues in different schools of public health and departments of environmental health, the environmental epidemiology component of those departments they've grown a lot more, whereas the toxicology part either stays the same or has diminished. Right. And most of those environmental epidemiology folks are looking at things that are broader in like climate change or built environment. I would say that it's definitely much more a component of environmental health now than it wasn't previously. And so I think the challenge to me is, again, going back to that risk comparison, it is so difficult to kind of compare those in some ways very detailed physiological models of toxicology and risk associated with exposures to chemicals to something like risk associated with climate change that is going to be so felt so differently around the world. So,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. Speaking of that, though, so these are very nuanced and complex conversations, obviously, because everyone has their own lens and their own perspective and ideas and thoughts and beliefs. But you yourself have, you grew up in West Virginia and you've traveled and lived other places. So how is, time and place is also another thing that affects your perspective in addition to how old you are and where you are in the world. So can you think of like how that has shaped how you perceive environmental health?
Yeah, I think it has a lot. So growing up in a very, very rural place with a dad that was a fisheries biologist for the state and going out on surveys in the summer with him. And again, just being in a very outdoorsy kind of environment, I think that has really shaped even my decision to go into public health, because as I mentioned, I started more in kind of ecological and fisheries and wanting to stay in that field. And I kind of realized that, well, people care about people a lot more usually than people care about other species. Yeah. So it might be useful to understand that and understand how it's kind of changing, our decisions about our environment are changing our health. And so that's what really kind of moved me into the field. And I would contrast that to a lot of other people that are in public health. They come at it from a very different perspective and a different background. So I've always kind of been a little bit more interested in the larger ecological forces that are happening in the world and not necessarily just the very specific chemical risks that humans may experience in their daily lives.
Right. Well, you spent a couple of years at the Environmental Defense Fund. Were you doing this type of thing there?
Yeah. So the Environmental Defense Fund, I looked at primarily air pollution policy, so Clean Air Act, and how we place monitors around the U.S. to be in compliance with the Clean Air Act. And if that has a way of some people are overexposed versus others, and we're not kind of capturing that from those monitors. So really looking at differences in exposure that aren't necessarily captured by our regulatory monitoring network, essentially. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. I don't know if, people know how much monitoring of everything is out there. So your students, I assume, are also learning to incorporate data, and you've used a lot of data and monitoring. When you bring the data into a conversation like this, what role does it play and how do you determine where you're getting it from and stuff?
Yeah, well, traditionally, we've always gone for the government sources. So the EPA has air monitoring data available as well as water monitoring data available. Sometimes, states also publish that data. And so being in Blacksburg, sometimes we'll go to the local data sources. So the health department, or in the case of Virginia, the Department of Environmental Quality. But because the federal kind of composite sources of data are actually in some ways easier to navigate, we have traditionally used those. We might have to change that a little bit going forward, because I know a lot of those data sources are not necessarily being kept up. So,
yes, that is interesting. So if we don't have these data sources, how will that affect our conversations about this moving forward?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, it's a whole new world, right? I mean, what are we going to use? I built a career around using these types of data to then estimate exposure that then we use with epidemiology or toxicology information to say, like, okay, that exposure is safe or not, and we need to do something about it. Like, that's how we make decisions, right? And without the data, like, I don't, how are decisions made? So I'm not understanding exactly what's in store for us, but I'm hopeful that maybe this is just a period of tearing down and then building back up in a more efficient way. So,
yes.
I agree.
Best case scenario at this
really
point.
Yeah,
that was not meant to be a trick question or anything like that.
No, I know, but it's a hard one.
Like, what are we going to do?
You're not alone, I'll tell you. In all facets, we've heard similar things. But I don't know. Like, you've had a very interesting career, and you've had kind of, like you say, you've seen a lot of different change come and go. And like the thread of your career has kind of been, human health. Where do you go from here? What's the next step for you beyond, like just teaching? What else are you going to be doing? What are you working on?
And still continuing to work on, federal funding too is something that my career has benefited from. And I have been able to kind of do scientific studies based on that. So I am, kind of transitioning. I just won my last federal funding ended in June.
Wow.
I'm holding out that maybe a couple of the grants that I have in are going to be funded, but that's probably not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a transition on that component, not on the teaching side so much, but besides, dealing with AI and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Is definitely
oh my gosh.
up.
Yeah. I can't even imagine.
Oh yeah.
Gosh,
yeah. But on the research side, it really is an opportunity to think about, stepping back and a lot of the data sources that, I've used in the past to kind of reassess, the whole body of work and what it's telling us. A lot of times I think in academia, we get in these modes of, okay, the next grant needs to answer this hypothesis or, address this hypothesis. And this came out of this and just move forward. And a lot of times we don't have an opportunity to kind of just step back and say like, okay, what is this whole body of work telling us?
Right.
And how can we pull that together to potentially generate, additional insights. And so I'm actually kind of looking forward to doing it. If other grants don't come through, that's kind of my plan, just stepping back, looking, I've always thought that maybe I wanted to write a book. I don't know. That seems like ridiculously daunting. I'm very used to writing scientific publications. A book is like, what? But,
one page at a time, just one page at a time.
Yeah, you say. And if it happens, it'll be great. I'm sure. I have no doubt.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned that though, because to me, you talk about looking at the big picture, and I always thought this was very amusing in NEPA, particularly for air quality. You'll have a project, and it'll say this one project is 0.003% of the entire state or county or whatever. Therefore, it has no impacts. Right? You have no possible impact because it's just so small. And then you look at it, and you're like, well, there's 100 of these. And we're all looking at each one individually because it's done by a different agency at a slightly different time. And if you look at the big picture, it's kind of how you get smog in California. Everybody's building something, and they're like, the weather, the air quality here sure is bad. I wonder how that happened. So I love the idea. I love the concept because California was like, oh, we have to fix this, because it's not good enough. Like what we're doing is not good enough. So I'm curious how that'll kind of play out for you.
Yeah. We'll see. But cumulative impacts. I mean, EPA is still not great at trying to measure those at all, NEPA or otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully maybe one day. It's hard though. It is very hard to even, just from, two different chemicals interacting and looking at, the same biological system to try and figure out, the joint effect is difficult. So.
Yeah, golly, yeah. I mean, there's so many variables. Okay, that's my scientist brain. I know. I'll go down a rabbit hole with you there. But I do want to keep us on point. So we do have a segment we love to call Field Notes, where we ask our guests to share memorable moments about doing their jobs. And so we always ask people to send their funny, scary, or awkward field stories to us at info@environmentalprofessionalsradio.com. Now, Julia, you mentioned your AAAS fellowship at the State Department. What's the story behind that?
Yeah. So when I was finishing up my postdoc at the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, and that's in North Carolina, I had 2 young kids, and I really wanted to learn more about climate change. And the AAAS offers these fellowships in DC, working in an agency. And I was like, I'm just going to go for this. I'll just apply. I knew they were really hard to get. And lo and behold, I got it. And then I did the interviews. Mm-hmm. So you interview around a lot of different agencies, and the State Department, the office that basically does climate change negotiations at the UN, offered me a position. And I was like, I can't turn this down. But it was unbelievably scary because I had to, my husband was doing a residency.
Oh, wow.
So could not move with me. I had 2 young kids, one that was starting kindergarten, another 3rd grade. So I put them in Washington, D.C. schools. And then this job, has a lot of traveling. I mean, it's the State Department. And so I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to just try. And so we did it. It worked out. My mom came, other family members came to watch the kids when I had to travel. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences that I've had in my career, because it was, to see kind of diplomacy in action and to work across federal agencies to come up with our position going into negotiations, thinking about all of our different stakeholders, was really just an amazing thing to see and to be a part of. And to see the people at the State Department work so hard. And I just was so impressed with the patriotism, honestly. It was really amazing. So.
Wow. So, I mean, like, what was that? I mean, that had to have been, like you say, it's a formative experience, obviously. But like, I guess I'm trying to understand a little bit more, like, what you were doing. So what were you actually, so you were with the State Department, and you're talking to other agencies about what? Like, what are you actually, like, give me an idea of like a project or something that you guys would work on. Because it sounds fascinating.
So I was actually put on the biofuels portfolio. And so there's this global bioenergy partnership. And so different countries get together and kind of talk about how they think about biofuels. And the US at that time had a corn ethanol mandate, and Brazil also had a sugar mandate, a sugarcane biofuel mandate. And there were lots of other countries that were kind of starting up biofuels. And so the idea is really, can we come up with metrics, sustainability metrics together to think about, is there this kind of food fuel trade-off? How do we prevent that? So there were a lot of this was 2009, 2010 era. So, it's a while back. So I don't know if you remember this kind of controversy. But anyway, so I mean, that was kind of what I was doing. And even to get the US position, as you can imagine, EPA and USDA have very different opinions on what should be done. Department of Energy has very different, they're getting all of those folks together. And it was actually the United States Trade Representative too, had very specific opinions about kind of sustainability metrics when it comes to biofuels. So it was just really, really interesting to see all of these different opinions, and then finally come to kind of like, okay, these are our negotiation points going into this forum. So
wow, that's very cool. That's a really cool thing. Yeah, and I love it. I really do.
Yeah, I'm still just, you brought the kids and left the husband behind. Like, when did you guys reunite? Like,
yes. In Alabama, we reunited. And I remember that first night when I arrived. So my husband had already moved to Alabama, and the kids and I arrived, and just being in the same house and going to sleep in the same bed with him, I just remember just feeling so much relief. I now have another partner that's helping me with these two kids. And I'm like, we're back together. It's like, because it was very stressful. It was amazingly rewarding, but yes, it was quite stressful.
That's the true conundrum of work-life balance. That's really it.
I'm impressed. A lot of people wouldn't do that. I would say most people wouldn't make that decision. So kudos to you.
Yeah. And it worked out. So I don't know. I think maybe this kind of leads into our closing here, because we'd love to ask questions about what our guests do for fun, because to us, it's kind of a great way to see who you are as a person. And we're talking about all this really intense and serious stuff, risk and all these things going on. And I'm like, there has to be something that you do for Zen, to get yourself, to calm yourself down. And I see you're into beekeeping and raising goats. And I'm like, is that it? Is that the Zen moment for you? Or is there something else? Or is that it?
Well, those are relatively new things that I'm trying. But actually us as a family, we love mountain biking, love hiking. So just actually, honestly, being out in the woods is my Zen. Just if I can be out in the woods, I can reset myself. And I think that truly is about me, going back to I grew up way out in the woods. And I remember as a child just feeling very comfortable being out in the woods. And that's something that I'm a little bit sad because I don't think a lot of people actually feel that way. And, to me, it's a little sad because it is so it feels so good to me. But beekeeping and 2 goats are new this summer. So cool. It's been really fun. I never thought that I would be interested in beekeeping, but I visited an apiary and, did the whole thing, lifted up the bees, like they're crawling all over. And it was just so amazing to just watch them work.
Yeah.
They're so intent on just doing their job. And so it's been a lot of fun. I'm hoping that I keep them alive and
number one goal.
They continue to be happy, but we'll see.
That's too great.
Next summer.
You have to check back in. Let us know. How are the bees doing?
Awesome. Well, we are running out of time. So is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we didn't touch on?
I don't think so. Thank you again for having me, though.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for being here. So where can people get in touch with you?
Definitely, you can find me on my Virginia Tech website. I do have a LinkedIn as well. I can't promise that I kept it like really up to date, but or check it very often.
But you're there.
Email, honestly, is probably the best, but that's on my Virginia Tech website.
There you go. Perfect. Well, thank you, Julia, so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
That's our show. Thank you, Julia, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.
Bye.